We're going to look at how a bill becomes a law, and you should have a flow chart that I want you to fill out as you go through. At the top of your flow chart, it says how a bill becomes a law flow chart. Obviously, it gives you some information there on the right-hand side. About 10,000 bills are introduced every year because remember we have 435 members in the House of Representatives, 100 members in the Senate, and their job is to make law. And a bill is a proposed law. So that is their job, to legislate, to make laws. And so between all 535 members of Congress, they have their constituents calling them in, giving ideas for laws. You have the president who is constantly giving them ideas. You have lobbyists who are lobbying members of Congress to introduce bills and make things into law. So a bill is a proposed law, and there are about 10,000 bills that are introduced every year, and less than 10% of those actually become law. And so there at the top of your flow chart, it said a bill is, and you should put drafted there. So members of Congress, the executive branch, and even outside groups can draft them, which means they can write them up. So you can actually write a bill, send it to your member of Congress. Now they have to introduce it, but anybody can come up with an idea for a bill. So, introduction, and as you go down this flow chart, the left-hand side is going to be how a bill goes through the House, and on the right-hand side of this flow chart is going to be how a bill goes through the Senate. A bill can be introduced in either the House of Representatives or the Senate. Just kind of a little review, all revenue raising, if they are going to tax you, those bills have to start in the House of Representatives. Any other bill can start in the Senate or the House. So as it goes through this flow chart, it's going to go all the way through the House side, and then it's going to go to the Senate and go all the way through the Senate side. Or it's going to start in the Senate, go all the way through the Senate, and then it's going to be sent over to the House of Representatives. So a bill has to go through both the House and the Senate before that we can send it to the president for him or her, if that ever happens, to sign it and for it to become law. So I'm going to kind of do this side by side, but just know that a bill has to go all the way through the process in the House of Representatives before we can send it over to the Senate. Then it will go through the whole entire same exact process in the Senate. They both have to sign it, and then it will go to the president. So your top two boxes on your flow chart, House of Representatives on the left, a bill is introduced and assigned to a committee, and then that committee is going to refer it to a subcommittees. Only members can introduce bills. So make sure that you know that on the floor of the House here, and I'm not going to get into details. There's a lot of extra, the process to get a bill to become a law is overwhelming, and so I'm going to try and make it as basic as I possibly can for our purposes for this class. So on that first line, a bill is introduced in the House of Representatives, and then it's assigned to a committee. Only members can introduce bills. On the right-hand side in the Senate, a bill is introduced and assigned to a committee, and then they're going to refer it to its subcommittee. All right, so same thing happens in the House. It's going to be introduced, then it's going to be assigned to a committee. Same thing, if it's introduced originally in the Senate, then it's going to be assigned to a committee. All right, so I've got pictures of committees here in the House of Representatives and the Senate. So instead of having a bill be investigated and worked on with all members of the House and the Senate, there are standing committees in both the House and the Senate. So we're going to look at the subject matter of this bill, and then we're going to assign it to its appropriate standing committee. And then what we're going to do is assign it to a subcommittee. So what a subcommittee does, and that's even a smaller, has even fewer members, they're the ones that are going to really do most of the work. At this point, if you want to put some notes out to the side of this, almost all work that is done in Congress is done in these committees. And typically, since only 10% of the bills pass, 90% of bills are going to die in one of these committees. And so for subcommittee, what I want you to put there This is where all the work is really done. They're going to hold a hearing and they're going to bring people in to testify on this particular bill, people who are for it and people who are against it. They're going to debate the issue, and then they're going to do what's called markup. So this is where they're going to take the bill. Let's say you wrote one that a member of Congress introduces. This is where they're going to, go through with a pen and start marking out things and adding things. This is where all of the work on this is going to be done. So, and that's for both sides, whether it's the House or the Senate. They're going to hold the hearings, they're going to debate it, they're going to discuss it, they're going to mark it up, and then 9 times out of 10, 90% of the time, this bill is going to die in this committee and we're never going to hear from it again. But if we pass it on, then it's going to go back to this full committee. And so for both of that, whether it's in the House or the Senate, the full committee is going to listen to the bill. If it approves it, then it's going to go on in the House of Representatives to a rule committee. This is not, they do not have this committee in the Senate. So on your left-hand side, you'll notice that it has a rules committee here. And so let's look at that. The House Rules Committee, and we have to have this one because there are so many more members. So make sure that you're putting in this in the box. This is a committee that's in the House and not the Senate, because there are 435 members in the House of Representatives. So we have to attach some rules to this bill. A couple of specific ones, they're limited in debate. And so they're going to say how long they can debate this bill. They're going to put it on a calendar. This committee is extremely important because, once again, we can vote to not even send it on. So it can die in this committee once again. So the Rules Committee exists in the House and not the Senate because we have to attach some rules to this just because of the sheer size of the House of Representatives, 435 members versus 100 members in the Senate. So once it gets through the committee process, that's where it's going to go back to the full House and the full Senate for a vote. So we're going to have a situation in the House of Representatives where they can debate it, they can try and change it, and same in the Senate. They're going to debate the bill, they're going to amend it, and then they're going to vote on it. And it's at this point that if it is voted out of both the House or out of the House, then it's going to go to the Senate, and it's going to start back at the top through this process where they're going to send it to the subcommittee, then it's going to go to the committee, then they're going to have the full Senate vote on it. If it's a Senate bill, then it's going to go to the House, it's going to go to the House subcommittee, it's going to go to back to their committee, then the Rules Committee, and then the full House gets to vote on this. And I apologize because I know this is a difficult process to understand. But if you get one side, the other side is exactly the same thing except for the House, where we're going to add the Rules Committee before it goes to the full House. Conference Committee. This, remember, is a joint committee. It's going to have members, excuse me, I need to flip this. It's going to have members of both the House and the Senate. So this is for farm and food assistance programs. And so this is a House and Senate Conference Committee. So the bill that they're discussing in this committee here has gone through the House. It went through subcommittee, committee, rules. The full House voted on it. We sent it to the Senate. The Senate sent it to its subcommittee. Then it went to the committee. Then it went to the full Senate. And so what happened was there were some changes that were made once it went to the Senate. And so we cannot send two versions of the same bill to the president. We can only send one. So what we do is we create this joint committee. And so the conference committee is a type of joint committee because it has members of both the House and the Senate. But this is a very important committee because we're going to come together and we're going to create one bill that we can send to the president. But once again, this is back in a committee. So once they iron out the differences between the House version and the Senate version of this bill, we got to send it back to the full House and the full Senate for a vote. And then once they vote on it, now we can send it to the president. So the president can either sign it and it becomes law, or he can veto it. If the president vetoes it, then it's going to go back to Congress for what's called a congressional override. And this is one of the checks that the Constitution is placed on the president. Because if you have, and if you look at this, there was a bill when President Obama was president that he vetoed it, and all members of Congress, all 535 members, if they were all present, voted to override this. So this was something that they thought was that important because they represent their constituents and that they knew that their people wanted this. So Obama was looking at kind of how this was going to affect relationships with other countries, specifically Saudi Arabia, and he was concerned about if this specific bill here went through, how was that going to affect our relations with Saudi Arabia? Congress says we really don't care. We're representing our people here in the United States, and we are going to vote to override his veto. So that's the process. Hopefully you were able to get this on your flow chart. I am going to put a key, I guess, for this flow chart. But I really, really, really want you to watch this video and make sure that you get the notes down in it. Then go back and check and make sure that your flow chart is correct.